and welcome to Pique My Interest, a podcast dedicated to creativity. My name is Scoob Decker, and I am an artist, and your host. Pique My Interest is an exploration meeting some incredible artists, learning about their craft and exploring what makes them create. This next artist stems from Nigeria and Washington, D.C. Inspired by comic books and later 90s hip-hop album cover artwork, Aniekan Udofia understood that if he sees that art, there must be an artist behind it. That pushed him to be a full-time artist, and both of those styles are influenced and is evident in his work. As a child, his parents gave him a sketchbook to pass the time, and the rest is history. That book started his need for drawing, while his folks were also his main limitation to pursue art, pushing for a different career. This episode dives into the challenges and sacrifices of being a full-time artist. Sometimes people just don't understand the artist's lifestyle. Artists have a language that can help communicate and influence your work. Aniekan is always inspired by his surroundings and other artists, trying to figure out how they do what they do and how he can do it in his own way. He is driven by storytelling. He has several series of murals, paintings, and illustrations that all tell their own unique story. He connects his creativity to the community. His work is for the city. This episode was recorded on December 1st in Washington, D.C. I hope you look up their work and your interest is piqued. I hope you're having a grand day, and please enjoy this week's episode I've titled, The Need to Survive. Hello, and welcome to Pique My Interest. I am currently in D.C., sitting with an amazing artist. How are you doing today?
Good. I'm doing great.
Excellent. Have you done anything interesting lately?
Oh, man, the most interesting thing I've done is sleep. Right.
You've been recovering from a couple galleries and exhibits and whatnot.
Yeah.
Awesome. And please, introduce yourself, pique our interest. What's your name and where are you from?
My name is Aniekan Udofia, and I'm originally Nigerian American. So I was born here in D.C., and my parents are from Nigeria, so I live between D.C. and Nigeria.
Mm-hmm. What is your craft?
So my craft is, I'm a painter, illustrator, and muralist.
Mm-hmm.
Here
you are
in
a
D.C.
stunning muralist, an awesome
you.
Illustrator, and I love your paintings.
Thank you.
Aniekan has got work all across D.C., and I was getting ice cream one day, and I looked outside and saw this massive mural that just took my breath away, and I saw the signature, and I went, I gotta reach out to this person. And so thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.
What makes your work different than others who do painting or mural work?
My mentality. Because I have so much inspiration. My inspiration mainly came from comic books and coloring books. And later on, way later, I discovered Alphonse Mucha. So that style, plus a bunch of, Jack Kirby and all the way down to Alex Ross, like I mentioned before, Bill Sienkiewicz, Adam Hughes, and all these people, like the combination of all those things in the back of my mind when I'm drawing or painting, like how did they do my favorite pieces of theirs, that I've seen. And so that mentality is what ends up becoming my style.
Yeah,
the inspiration
from other artists. Mm-hmm. I love that. And you talk a little bit about comic style. I just want to say your work is very comic reminiscent. It's a very cool pastel, and it's got a very unique twist to it. And I just want to say it stands out, and I think it's stunning. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Do you have any background in painting, or do you have any education in mural work?
So in the beginning, it's just like everybody, you draw personally. As a kid, my parents made the mistake of giving me and my siblings coloring books, and it was the worst decision they've ever made, because here we are now, and there's a funny story which I'll tell later, so it circles back into which is it circles back into my current series. So anyway, my parents would give us coloring books. And I remember still as a kid, you saw the line work in the coloring books, and then eventually you go, oh, you figure it out. The light bulb goes off, and you go, someone drew this. Or it's so simple, you're like, I can do this, as a kid. So between me and my sister, my younger brother was too young at that time to draw, so he would just take the crayons to the wall and do scribbly things. And then my parents were like, it's because of you guys, So it started there. And then as I grew older into teens, start noticing like it's currency. So you draw something cool, you make friends instantly, people want you to draw for them and things like that. And then it starts building out. Now, years later, it's where I found value in learning the fundamentals. So I went to UDC here in DC, and they had kind of like a really, not a up to par enough art department because it wasn't that important. So I then went to MCAD, Maryland College of Art and Design, which is in Wheaton, in Maryland here. So I wasn't satisfied.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to study illustration. And even at that time, I didn't know what it was. I didn't know. It's like, illustration is, it's a whole thing on its own. So I kept searching for that, and eventually I just kind of dropped out and then just kept, quote unquote, this self-taught kind of realm, like kind of picking up from other artists and like styles or techniques. And then eventually I was able to sign up for mentorships.
Okay.
Taking those, whether it's one-on-one or a small group classes from artists that I admire. And then the whole thing makes sense altogether.
So you got a little bit more education working with artists rather than in a formal education setting.
And especially artists that are working in the industry I'm trying to get into. So not only are they giving you the skill set, for drawing and painting, they're also giving you advice on terms of the business side.
Yeah, the ins and outs on how to run a business. That's tough. And you said you were from the DC, Nigeria combo area. What about your upbringing turns you into a creator?
The need to survive. So where I was born here in DC, in America, and then we moved to Nigeria, and it's different language, different culture entirely. So how do you survive in that? And the tools, again, it's like, we would go outside and we draw stuff, and all the kids are like, oh, can you draw this? So the need to, once you get that first hit of like, oh, wow, I'm communicating here, you continue, you want to do more. So that became the survival, and then later on, it becomes physical cash. Like, how do I make money from this? Because I went to boarding school back home, and my parents were not, they were very strict. So they'll give you a certain amount for your 3 months at the boarding school. And then what I discovered in the boarding school is like, and then you have to create an income within, because you can't just leave campus and go home, every day or when you need something. So you have to create something. So I would draw like assignments, people's assignments and stuff, like skeletons and things like that they couldn't draw. And I would charge them to draw those things.
Gotcha.
And it generated funds, and it piqued my interest, and I was like, so you can do this. What more can I do in that sense?
Gotcha.
Art
is
so
from the need to survive.
So it's like it's fun, but it's like, at the same time, it's also paying me. And believe it or not, even at that time, it sounds like, I was this entrepreneur. It didn't make sense.
Yeah.
It didn't click.
Right.
So I'm just doing like, okay, I need $20. I draw something. You want this? And it wasn't like I was like stacking up the money and, sitting there like, but that need to create kind of, mixed in with the need to survive,
Absolutely. And speaking of your interest being piqued and the need to survive, what piqued your interest about illustrating? From your journey from Nigeria back to DC, what made you come back to the United States to pursue art?
Unfortunately, what brought me back was the war between my parents and me wanting to do art. I understand now because, okay, so illustration, what piqued my interest in illustration is storytelling. So even if it's like Superman, somebody knew to draw him with his hands on his hip and his chest out, standing above all, like either on top of a building or like on top of like somehow the angle is you looking up to him. And then there's this cape floating to suggest there's wind, but he's standing still. So as a kid, when I saw that, it blew my mind. I'm like, I want to do that. Not drawing Superman per se, but I want to be able to tell that story. Like something happened and someone can look at the image and go, okay, I see this person is swimming away from a shark or something at a very young age. So it's a funny story. So I used to, those Quaker Oats and Uncle Ben.
Yeah.
So in my mind as a kid, I can tell, like, it looks like the Quaker Oat guy, it looks like he's saying in the image, it looks like he's saying, oh yes, this is my product and I stand by it. And I was a kid and I can see that. So I always tell my mom, and my mom thought I was possessed. Like, it's Quaker Oats, it's rice. It's not, those are just images. And I'm like, no, the way Uncle Ben is smiling, it's like, you want this rice. You know what I mean? And to me, the way I was looking at it. So that is what I was like, I don't know what it is, but that's what I want to do. And how do you explain that to your parents? So it caused a conflict between me and them. Yeah. And they're like, why don't you study this thing here? Do your art thing on the side. And they tried different things and it didn't work. So eventually I had to leave. I explained to my aunt, who was currently here at the time, what I wanted to do. She got it, but it was hard for my parents to get it. So eventually she said, why don't you come here and try it out, and see where it goes.
Yeah, and also what I learned when we got food the other day is that you are heavily inspired by hip-hop albums. And you saw a lot of those when you were in your upbringing, and that's what you wanted to do. I love the fact that you brought up storytelling, because that's what album art is.
Yeah.
You're trying to take the artist's story and put it in your work.
The worst thing that can happen to my parents. It's not enough that I want to do art. I want to do hip-hop art. And to them, hip-hop is like blah, 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 curse word, blah, 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 curse word. And it's like, what is this? And we're like, it's hip-hop. And they're like, okay. So then imagine your son is like, yeah, I want to work in that industry with the shouting and the cursing and all that stuff. And they're like, doing what? And I'm like, the album covers. So can you imagine that conversation, how it wouldn't go well at all? Because on one hand, one person understands what they want to do this for. And then the other hand, it's like, yeah, parents, they're looking at like, I don't want you to, I don't want you to ruin your life doing this, and then they're projecting the future, like, how do you feed a family doing this? So it caused a lot of conflict, because at that time I was already lost. Like, the album covers, the hip hop culture itself, the dress codes and all that stuff. Even the way I drew then was really reminiscent of the fisheye lens thing, like people sitting on top of Jeeps and, things like that. I was captivated because, again, we go back to the storytelling thing. I remember Organized Confusion. They had an album called Stress. And that album cover, once I saw it, I was like, exactly, that's what I want to do. And then, as if that's not enough, I saw Tribe Called Quest album cover and the illustration of, I think it was the Instinctive Travels album.
Yeah.
And I was like, again, this is what I want to do. And then in between that was editorial illustrations and different things like that kept, the light bulb kept going off. Like, oh, see, someone does this for a living. I want to do that. Right. My parents were like, not in this house. You will never do this at this
So
go and study engineering.
You moved back to the United States.
Yes.
Did you start doing album covers right away?
Not right away.
No.
My career started at Burger King. On Columbia Road.
So tell us, what was the grind like?
So then, when I got here, it was complete culture shock, different, because I'm watching MTV, MTV Raps, and all those things back home. And then you come here, and I thought I was going to see Snoop Dogg and them, just walking casually down the street.
Asking for album art.
And not to my shock, that was not the outcome. So I started at Burger King on Columbia Road and then graduated to working security, the uniform security. And then I had to work for a moving company. And then eventually I worked at CVS. But all these jobs are going on at once. Right. Because at the same time, I'm also going to UDC. So the same kind of thing that happened in boarding school happened again. I'm like, there has to be a way to get your artwork, to the labels or something. So I started going up to New York. And the way I would do it is I used to collect a lot of hip-hop magazines, and because that was my market.
Yeah.
So I'm looking through and I see, editor, this, art director, this, and all those photography and all that stuff. So I'm reading through that, and at the bottom, they show you the address, 1115 Broadway, New York City. And I'm like, that's where I'm going. I'm going to go there. And so I went to a bunch of magazines, Rolling Stone, Vibe, XXL, The Source. And I didn't know anybody in New York, so I would go there for a day. I'd take a Greyhound bus here on my day off here, go up there. My portfolio was trash. Like it was, like you can see there's the effort, but it wasn't, according to what they told me, they were like, it's not printable. Now, most people, this would break their heart. It's just like, finally, I'm in. I've gotten a sit down with an art director. But to me, that was the best thing I ever heard.
Fueled the fire.
Yeah. So once they told me like, oh, it's not printable, but then they gave me a sample pack. They gave me a folder with all the materials from the other artists, like their flyers, their postcards, and stuff like that, samples of their work. And then I learned about disposable portfolios, which is Xerox copies of your work that is disposable. You could just drop that off. And because those art directors are super busy, so it's not like they're sitting there twirling their thumbs waiting for you to come in. There are hundreds of artists turning in work. So I I brought that back, and it was so confusing to people here because I would come back and they go, oh, so did you get the job? And I'm like, no, but I got this portfolio with all these other artists' work. And I can imagine people looking at me like, are you serious? Like, that's what you do all this for? And
you went to go sell art and you picked up other art.
Right. So I'm there, and my security job is where I then sat down and did the homework. I would look, because the security job, on purpose, I would work overnight. So like 7 to 7, 11 to 11. And I would use that time and really study what was going on with the other artists that they were hiring. So that then in 2003, eventually I got the first job with XXL magazine. And then that began my adventure working in hip hop, which then eventually locally, some people who did mixtapes then started contacting me, and then eventually I did an album cover for a local group here that was called Critically Acclaimed, and it was a vinyl album. So I was that was my first, and I was like, yes, finally, yes! I got it. And then Apollo Brown, the producer, he had an album called The Reset, and that was my the more famous one because Apollo Brown, it was well known, and so that was now confirming okay, I can do this, and that's how that started. So yeah, I did end up doing the album cover art and the mixtape art, but it was in between these jobs that I'm telling you, and then way later in the game.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your passion. I mean, because of that, you got to express yourself and the world gets to see your work. So really appreciate that. And from your beginnings of this digging urge to become an artist to where you are now, you've got murals all over the city. You're selling your work. To me, that says you're successful. What is success in your craft? Do you consider yourself successful? And what really got you succeeding?
Success to me is more, for me personally, is the accumulation of all these failures. So I don't really see, it's like the sum of all failures, all the failures. To me, is the success because for some strange reason, my personality type of I must learn how this works or I'll figure this out. Like I said, I go up, I didn't have any appointments in New York, and I didn't know what I was doing. And so I would just find the offices and just go there. Like, can I talk to the art director? And they're like, do you have an appointment? And I'm like, no. Are you supposed to? And they're like, yeah, you set up an appointment, you bring your portfolio, or you can drop it off. And I was stubborn. And I'm like, I'm not dropping off my portfolio. But then in the process, someone told me about disposable portfolio. But again, since I'm stubborn, I'm like, okay, fine. I'll Xerox my work.
Right.
I don't know if they'll use it or not or something like that. What are the dangers of doing that? Does it stay in a stack somewhere where they never look at it, or do they steal it? Or I didn't care. That is what led to the next thing happening and the next thing happening, so it's all these failures that happen, and then it gets to the point of and then you look back and go, oh, wow, I did do that over there. And so going back and trying to find that recipe, which I'll explain later, it might come back up later, the importance of recipe. Just like cooking. You cook something once and it's like, oh my goodness, this is the best. And it wasn't intentional because you had a pinch of this and that. That pinch is not enough. So which one did you add more or less? So then you save the recipe. And then the recipe becomes another person's recipe and so on, which is what we define as success. Because they're like, oh, he has a successful recipe. How did it come about? It was like a bunch of mistakes. There's fear, uncertainty, and so all this stuff, if I set out, I'm going to be an artist, I'm going to do illustrations and blah, 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 I would say, yes, I would deem myself successful, but it's just the sum of failures. And then you look back and you go, oh, wow, that did happen over there.
And you can see how much you've grown.
Yeah. And so it's for me, success is, in my life and my experience, the sum of all these failures, the curiosity, the mistakes, because there were a lot of breakups, in terms of relationships. And I don't blame those people now in retrospect, because just like my parents, it's like, what do you want? You keep going up to New York and you came back excited about them giving you a folder with other people's work. Put yourself in that situation. Like someone is, the aspiration and the motivation and the desires there, but where does this go?
Right.
Where are you going with this? So that's another failure. That is like, you're like, oh, you're busy in your head going, oh, I got this portfolio with all this stuff, and now I have work that I can use as, reference to build my portfolio, but you're hurting someone else.
Yeah. Well, let's step away from the failures a little bit and let's get back into your success. How do you start your creation process? Where do your ideas come from, and how do you put them to the page or to the wall or to a canvas?
So I work in series a lot, and these series it's kind of like storytelling, just the illustration thing, like I said before. There's a series I had called The Sickness, and that was like a collection of all the stuff, all the hip-hop stuff I used to paint and draw. And then The Sickness slowly became Reloaded later on. And then Reloaded then gave birth to, in between Reloaded and Return of the Shaolin Pencil, there was one about me growing up in Nigeria called The Village B-Boy. So that's a series of images, one-shots of how I remember hip-hop kids in Nigeria in the 90s. And it was very subtle because you'll see someone wearing, like, for example, they had Nike here, but people can't afford Nike there, so they would make imitation Nikes, and we would call it Nike, or sometimes they don't even know it's an N, and so they put an M, maybe like Mike or Mikey, So I work in series.
Okay.
Boom, 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 and now we're at Return of the Shaolin Pencil, between Reloaded and Return of the Shaolin Pencil, because of the philosophies and things like that I'm now learning. So before, the main focus was comics, and then it became hip-hop comics, and then hip-hop comics and, commercial, like doing shows or, then all those things adding up. So that's how I've been able to build. So whenever my process starts with what goes in where.
Okay.
Can You Dig It was a series that I did because I stumbled upon one of those. I was watching Enter the Dragon, and I saw Bruce Lee and Jim Kelly, the guy with the afro, the black guy with the afro. And that movie, I remember being a kid, and it was just like such a cultural icon because Bruce Lee, karate and all that. And then like even the villain with the, sharp, things. And he had a hand that he had different like weaponized hands, and he can replace them and stuff like that. So I started watching blaxploitation movies, like a bunch of them, and then a bunch of documentaries. And what I like about the 70s was the fashion and the way people talked. And, hey, say, man, like, hey, you're like, can you dig it? Can you dig it, man? So I ended up titling. So I picked these different scenes where there's the fashion, the music, and that was another one. I discovered a lot of really dope soundtracks from those movies. Like Curtis Mayfield, James Brown, they all did like super dope soundtracks that are still classics today. So Can You Dig It? That was the whole thing. I built that around Can You Dig It? Now, The Sickness was a combination of all the work, all the hip-hop work, because people would be like, oh, that's sick. But at the same time, I was trying to do social commentary. And I'm going, that's sick and that's sick, So it flopped really bad because once I started doing social commentary, people were like, what happened to your hip-hop stuff?
Right.
We liked that more. And I guess people felt like it was too dark because of the way I was going. And at this time, I'm consuming a lot of Carlin and, people who were speaking publicly about certain things that were happening in the world. So I'm throwing people off. So they go, what happened to your colorful hip-hop stuff? So I had to take a break.
Sure.
And I thought about it, and people advised me, and they were like, yeah, well, the thing is, you can create what you want, but you still have to sell it. You have to make a living. And I was like, oh, really? And prior to that, I was more of I'm expressing myself through my art. And it's like, yeah, you can express yourself, but also have to make a living. So from there, I took a little bit of a break, very short break, to rethink things. And that's where, when I came back, Reloaded was born with the pencil series and all that.
Yeah, I absolutely love the pencils. You talked about the power of the pencil, and even if you break it in half, you can resharpen them, and you got 2 more tools to just continue to create.
Right.
And you've got these series, the Reloaded series across DC, and they are stunning and vibrant and really cool. You're also known for a Marvin Gaye mural in town. You've got a George Washington mural in town. They're phenomenal. They're great.
Thank you.
Appreciate your storytelling through murals and your artwork. But how do you find this passion? What inspires you? And how do you overcome a creative block?
What inspires me is the curiosity, the need to figure out the puzzle. So I'll be minding my business, and then just like when I was a child and I saw Uncle Ben or the Quaker Oats guy, and I'm like, that's a painting. And he's literally telling you, like, yeah, buy this product. Like, I back it, you know. So that's my inspiration. So I go to the comic book store, I go to Barnes and Nobles, and just look at book covers and try to see, like, which one of these covers would draw me in.
Speaks to you.
Yeah. And the same thing with the comic book store. There's thousands of comics in there, and you're looking like, why should I buy this Batman issue? And why are certain artists, when they do a cover, like you see like a Mike Mignola or something like that, or Alex Ross, and to name a few, like, and it's like, why is this more important than all these other books in here? What did they do that is so special? Why do people talk about them so much? And so that's where I draw inspiration. Art books, going to the comic book store and looking at stuff, going to other artist shows and looking how they resolve these different puzzles and things like that. And so for me, once I see that, then I either have a personal idea and I'll go and start sketching in the sketchbook. When it's commercial, and this I learned from Sterling Hundley, this amazing illustrator. So there's a system that you use to come to the actual image. And that's what I use mainly for the mural stuff. So there's a whole system of starting with word stacks and a word list, and then you pull icons and build bridges, and then you start the sketch.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so that too is inspiring for me because it's almost like a scientific kind of problem, and you're sitting there writing equations and stuff like that and connecting words that then form an image or an idea sparks from you creating bridges between stacks of words that are related to the project. So for me, that gets exciting, and being able to create the final piece and have the client and the public satisfied. And me, I'm satisfied with it as well.
Just immersing yourself in a rekindled passion of what you truly are in love with.
Everything around me, like even my eyes right now, like I'm looking over there, I'm like, oh, with orange wall with the yellow, and then there's orange, that's inspiration is constantly there. Like I think Pablo Picasso said inspiration will find you, but it should find you working, So my head, I'm already working. I'm looking at patterns and composition. Someone is leaning a certain way at a bar, or they have, an interesting outfit on, or the way their hair looks. And for me, like, it's constant inspiration.
Yeah. Allowing your mind to be open to that inspiration. I love that. I really do. And while you're out and about, opening up your mind, do you have any hobbies? Do they complement or contradict your craft?
That's a good question. Compliment or contradict?
Do you like to get outdoors?
I do. Okay, so kayaking lately has been a thing.
Okay.
It has to do with letting go, not being in control, because the water is just, if the waves are going one way and you're trying to force yourself towards the other side.
You're not going that way.
Yeah. So that's one. I like physical activity. So I play basketball. I've played in this neighborhood, actually, Adams Morgan here, since '99. Yeah, I've been playing. I still play now, but it's when time allows, off and on. And then there's also, like I said, going to the bookstores and the comic book stores. Those are really hobbies. I really love that stuff. I get excited, even right now. I get thinking about talking about it. I'm like, I haven't been to Barnes & Noble because I've been to the comic book store, because right now that's where my focus is. Like a lot of diving into the comic book industry, and doing stuff. So I would say I also go out a lot. Like I have a lot of DJ friends from my history of like hip hop stuff, and so those DJs, anytime they're spinning somewhere, they'll hit me up, or sometimes I might see it on social media. Like, I'm gonna be at this place on Friday or Saturday. That's another one of my hobbies. That's more. Now, the part that might be destructive about that is sometimes you stay out too late and you're like, okay, I'll burn the night, so, at the expense of having fun, so it's like, okay, if I come back at 2 or 3, that means I'm be up till 8 in the morning. And then I hate myself for, I could have gone home at 12 and had time to sleep and just get off it. That's happened a few times.
Well, that will just lead into us going a little further. Mm-hmm. What is your advice to get educated for newcomers in mural work or painting or illustrating? Would you recommend going to school or trying to mentorship with another artist?
I definitely recommend mentorship. Very important. Mm-hmm. Especially with, you pick the artist you like, and what a lot of people don't know is there are artists who don't even know they can mentor someone. So it takes a little message, an email, or a DM on social media like, hey, I'm trying to improve this and that, which I admire in your work. Is there a way you can show me? Here's the budget I have for that, and I just want this much of your time per week or day or whatever. And you'll be surprised how that would turn into a relationship that not only you learned about the skills and stuff like that, but then you are introduced into the industry as well, because this artist can vouch for you. Like I trained them, and now you're in the industry and they can directly plug you in. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I highly recommend for that reason. Another reason too is you need that ego death because a lot of people say I'm self-taught, and there are these myths about art like, I did that in 10 minutes, and artists are looking going 8 hours, easy, so that ego death has to happen, like the self-taught thing. It's cool for someone because, of course, people want to be impressed. Like, oh, wow, you did that. You never took any classes. Those classes are necessary. I don't care whether you're doing abstract or portraiture or even illustration, storytelling. There are certain techniques. There are certain systems. There are certain fundamentals that if once understood, you can go way beyond what you're currently doing. Mm-hmm. So I highly recommend education. Now, traditional education, no. It's super expensive. And there's a high chance you will not do, what I learned from being an illustrator, they don't hire students fresh out of school. You have to develop what is known as a tear sheet. Tear sheet is you've actually actively worked with some kind of art director, and it's in print. Show me that sheet. Right. And so they use that sheet to So to determine. So I that's why I highly recommend mentorships with people who are in the industry you're interested in.
I will say education systems are great to learn about the process and the art, but it's definitely what they want you to learn, and not necessarily what is necessary in the world out there. But I also will say, you have a quote in an article I read about your beginning early artwork saying, my work sucked at the beginning. So I think it's just being able to accept the fact that you are growing, and that you will eventually get there.
Right.
And it's just that passion that
the
you
curiosity, like, it's like, oh, I want to draw, let's say I want to, like, the superhero stuff. I want to draw superheroes, but then that, whatever you learn from that then transpires to, oh, this is why the hip-hop stuff is working. But how do they draw superheroes? Perspective and all those things, You ask fellow artists, and they say, "Have you read this book called How to Draw Superheroes the Marvel Way?" And you just go get it and learn. Like what about it? Why is everybody talking about this book? And why are my favorite, comic book artists talking about it? And then you follow that lane. That learning curve is not there in the traditional school, because they'll say, "Okay, painting 101. This is how you paint. This is a brush. Here's how you mix paint," and stuff like that. Whereas on this other side, you have tougher problems. They say, okay, here are 4 books. Read these books and come up with your version of the book cover.
Right.
And you're like, wow, so where do I start? How am I going to beat the person who did the original cover?
Right.
And you know what I mean? And so that becomes more interesting. And the more you dive into that, you start resolving other problems,
Right. Absolutely. And time to clear the air a little bit. Are there any misconceptions about your craft? Anything you want people to know?
I could write a book about that. Actually, I am writing a book. No, I'm kidding.
Author.
I think we got to add that to the list. No, there are a lot of misconceptions about art. For example, like I said, I've told people this before, and I don't know why. Sometimes people get offended. Maybe it's because of the lineup. So I'll say a doctor and an engineer and an artist are there, and the doctor, they ask the doctor, "What do you do?" And it's like, "I'm a doctor." People go, "Wow, that's amazing." You're like, "Yeah, I study medicine." And you're like, "Cool. You?" And like, "I'm an engineer." "Oh, wow, yeah." And so people exalt those ones, and then they ask the third person, "What do you do?" Say, "I'm an artist." A little bit of silence, and they go, "Oh, wow, cool. My 6-year-old is an artist. What kind of art do you do?" See how they talking to you down like a child. Like, "Oh, you haven't figured it out," basically. Because my 6-year-old is an artist, and look at this thing that my 6-year-old did. It's like, okay, so would you expect to go to the children's hospital and expect to see 6-year-olds conducting bypass surgery or something like that? You know what I mean? Like, this is equally as important as these. And by the way, that guy that said I'm an engineer actually started in architecture. And then his interest peaked when he saw, like, oh, there are inner wirings in things that I don't want to just draw. I want to touch. I want to, put it together. I want to be in the room when they're...
exploration.
Yeah. So these are artists. Even the doctor, he went from drawing animals and stuff like that to like, oh, how does this work?
Right.
Looking at it live, like, oh, I like this. I actually, I want hands-on. And so these people are also doing 3D stuff. They're looking at X-rays and things like that. So they are kind of, their creativity is activated in a different way.
Right.
The artist is also doing what these people are doing.
Just in a different way.
Yeah, and theirs is just like, how do I take this 3D world and flatten it out in a 2D on a sheet of paper or on a canvas?
But they're just viewed as artists.
Yeah, and the myth is like, oh, artists don't make money. Artists are not good businessmen, or artists are, it's uncertain. it's like, what isn't uncertain out here?
Oof.
You know?
And it was interesting when we were getting food the other day, you talked about how artists have a language, a communication that no matter who we are, we understand storytelling and we can have that conversation. I absolutely love that.
And that's another thing, another myth. Like, if you go somewhere and see a group of artists are talking, most people don't understand what they're talking about or getting all excited about, you know, like, and then we throw names out and it further lose people because they're like, what, you know, and it depends on what industry. So you have the painters, and then you have the illustrators over here, and then you have the comic book artists, and all these people are talking, and they're talking about composition, and in the real world, people call that sketching, and we call it comps. You know, oh, look at these thumbnails, you know, and stuff like that, and you know, it sounds crazy to the average person, but we are excited. Like, imagine. You see a huge piece, finished piece, and all the artists are excited about, let's see the compositions. Let's see. I want to see the sketches. I want to see the thumbnails, how it started. What were your reference materials? You know, and seeing like, oh, he saw a horse in Virginia and then went to Philly and saw this old building, and then went over here to LA and saw these trees and the horizon, and mixed all that together to tell a story in DC. You know, like, you know what I mean? Like, so it's very hard to explain that to to an average person who doesn't know how does art work, what are you doing, why are you doing it, you know, so there's all these mystics say, oh, you're just expressing, you know, you're just expressing yourself, you know. And there's like, people think it's speed that is more important. So when I'm painting a mural, or anytime I see someone, like, whenever the one question I get all the time when I'm working, when are you gonna finish? You know, and it just directly, like, it's like, how long is it gonna take you to finish? I'm like, oh shit, I didn't know you were my supervisor. You know, like, why that question? And when I ask people that, they kind of pull away, like, oh, you know, they think I'm attacking them. It's like, no, I'm trying to figure out where you're coming from. I can ask another artist, I can see a piece and ask another artist, oh, because I saw there's a certain part of it that I know took hours to do. Like, they painted gravels, and, you know, it's like in a train yard. And that's where I would say, how long did it take you to do this? You know, it's very specific. But when people ask that question, like seeing someone doing a mural or artwork, and they go, how long does it, you know, how long will it take you? They're trying to consider how good you are by how fast you work because of social media. We see a lot of, what is it called? Time lapse.
Yeah.
People see time lapse, and slowly but surely, now people actually believe, and some of the artists on social media are lying. So they'll say, oh, this mural took me 2 days.
Right.
And
90 seconds on the
yeah, and a 10 by 10 mural, for me, depending on what the subject matter is at least a week. And I'm talking about like 8 to 10 hours a day of working will still take a week, because you have the sketch, the blocking, the detailing. And so if I say it took me a week, and this other person says it takes them 2 days to do a 40-foot wall, people look at it like, oh, then that person is better than you. You know, you know what I mean?
Another misconception I hear is that mural artists can't be scared of heights.
That's a lie. I am terrified of heights. Okay, so I'm going to casually going, 40 feet. No, it's not fun. It is not fun, especially when you're in the lift.
Right.
So the lift gets lighter the higher up it goes, which means any wind will sway it. And it's almost like you're in, because you can see through the lift to the ground. So you're up there and this thing is shaking. Your stomach has that thing where it's like, like you start the most gut fear of this thing. I might fly out of this thing, or it's gonna tilt over. All your fears of heights. I am terrified of heights, and somehow the tallest I've done was 9 floors high.
Wow!
It's on U Street. Yeah, 15th and U. The whole time I was shaking because there's a really tall tree next to the building. The bottom, how I know I'm at the bottom of the mural if I can see the top of that tree. It was so annoying. Like every day I would go up like I gotta do this again. No, and then you get in and you just pump yourself up.
It's that passion.
Yeah, exactly. Again, and that too, another failure thing that leads to what then becomes a success. Because at the end of the day, I come back down and I'm like, oh, I was up there. Okay,
yeah,
cool. It's over for today until like tomorrow you have to do it again.
Right. And I think, I read a quote earlier that I think can sum up one of the reasons what drives you is that your murals are not for you, it's for the city. And I think that that's just powerful enough to just push you through that shakiness and that worriness to get that mural up. So thank you for pushing through that and sharing yourself. But what's next for the world of your craft? Any projects coming up?
Oh man! Again, speaking of piquing my interest, so I've been looking into 3D, 3D printing.
Sure.
So Return of the Shaolin Pencil and Reloaded. I'm starting to draft the first. I have the 2 first prototypes of a 3D version of the work. So what I'm doing now is I want to create the actual piece in 2D, whether it's painted, drawn, or illustrated, and then have the 3D version as well.
Okay.
So one of them is this girl on a lowrider bike, one of those West Coast bars, and she is holding a pencil on her shoulder. And so I have that as a 3D print, and it blew my mind. I'm like, oh my God, the 3D version of my own work. So now I want to do more of that and maybe create a series, maybe about 6 to 10 of those. Moving into the next year, that'll be my focus, to create those pieces and have something kind of interactive. I might even pull something from each series and make a 3D bust of each one of those series.
Just a showcase of all your work. I love that.
Yeah.
And where can we see your work?
Right now, you can see me on Instagram. I do Twitter a little bit. My website, because I want to add a store to it, is under construction right now.
Okay.
So I'm working with a few people, both on the e-commerce side, business, and then also in terms of the design of the website. So it'll be return of the website.
Be on the lookout for a new website coming.
Yes. Aniekan Udofia.com. Yeah.
Perfect. I can't thank you enough for joining me and piquing my interest. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up?
Oh, man. Yeah, I thank you as well. I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to talk about these things.
No, it's my pleasure. And
I'm a fan of the podcast.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. It means the world that you reached back out and was able to share yourself and your creativity and your story. I do like to end with one question. Mm-hmm. If you could excel at any craft other than your own, what would you want to do?
Wow, that's another tough one. What would I like to do? You know what I really liked to do back when I was working odd jobs? I like packaging.
Okay.
Yeah, I like to be in a warehouse where it's like, packaging stuff.
Simple.
Yeah, just filling boxes with stuff and, putting them. I loved it because it's almost like the art community, because everybody down there, we're collaborating.
Yeah.
So this person is in charge of bringing the things in. We're in charge of putting them in the boxes and making sure they're sealed right for it to move out. Again, that idea of it belongs to the public. Someone's box comes in and you put this stuff in, and in your mind, it's like, how would I like this delivered to me? How would I like it to be packaged? So it has to do with the mural stuff. It's before it was like, oh, look at me, I'm on the walls or stuff like that. But now you're realizing people are coming and giving you feedback and saying, wow, I really like what you did. It's in my neighborhood. I show it to my children, show it to my friends, my loved ones. And you're like, oh. So now when I'm creating these things, I go and investigate the neighborhoods, like keep them in mind. Because it's for the city. People are enjoying these pieces. So on one hand, it's my work, but we're collaborating, and then people are like, oh, I looked at this piece and I knew it was you. I saw the pencil. And it's like, wow, my personal stuff now becomes their personal stuff, where they're following the work and they are taking it on. So if I was to do something outside of that, I would do something that is similar.
Yeah, I've loved
where it's like something that...
I love your unique insight. That's great. And I love you sharing yourself and sharing your craft. And thank you to all my peekers out there. Please let me know if you know of any special or unique artists or art forms you think I should explore. I'm currently in DC and can't wait to see where Pique My Interest takes me next. Remember, creativity comes from the heart. Push yourselves, be kind to each other. I'm Scoob Decker, and thank you for helping me pique my interest.
Cool. Awesome.